Hi, I'm Barb Downey. I'm from Downey Ranch, Inc., and our ranch is located in the northwestern part of Wabaunsee County. My husband, my 2 daughters, and I run our cow-calf ranch on a day-to-day basis.
And I'm Amy Langvardt. We raise registered Angus cattle, 3 generations working together. Our son, daughter-in-law, my husband Carl, and my mom and dad. Wabaunsee County's in the heart of the Kansas Flint Hills. We feel really fortunate to be living here. My husband and I have been here about 25 years, and we came here because of the grass. Native grass is the best for growing cattle.
When the Flint Hills were settled, there was a reason the sodbusters skipped over this part of Kansas. And there's a reason why you don't see large cattle herds in Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, which was home of the native tallgrass prairie. It is because we have an incredibly rocky landscape here that we never plowed, that it's not suitable for farm ground. You know, I know when we burn in the springtime, you know, you'll have these black hillsides and it looks like they're probably 2/3 rock. And you wonder, how in the world does the grass even grow between those rocks? But the fact of the matter is, there is absolutely no farming around here. You couldn't do it. The hillsides themselves, the bulk of the Flint Hills, could never be farmed.
Large ruminants have always been here on the Flint Hills, and that's part of what makes the Flint Hills what it is. It's really the only way to utilize this land.
I think to talk about good grass, we need to talk about ruminants first.
The reality is that this land, this Flint Hills grass, needs grazing ruminants to take care of it, and we're here to ensure that that happens.
You know, that grass that's out there growing, the cattle eat. You and I would starve to death on it. It'd make a nice salad, but we would never live on it. A rumen lets a cow, through the microbiome that is in that rumen, digest that grass and turn it into beautiful, complete protein that's a valuable source of nutrition. So that grass is our base fundamental resources. Amy and I and our families are grass farmers at the heart of it. Our job is to make sure that the grass is well managed and growing well so that we can in turn produce that protein. It's a symbiotic relationship between the grazers and the grass. The grass requires clipping. It requires trampling the hoof action of those large ruminants to cause it to turf instead of bunch like it wants to. The insects and the microbiome that are essential for a healthy prairie require manuring. They require all of those things that animals bring. They need each other for each to thrive.
The cattle need the grass just as much as the grass need the cattle.
I think one of the interesting things that we didn't get to when you're talking about that cycle and how the grasses need animals on them grazing is the interesting phenomenon with CRP, Conservation Reserve Program. A lot of marginal farm ground in our area was put back to native grass, which sounds great. It grows beautiful native grass. But what we found is the missing piece. It's a very sterile environment. You don't have the grazers, you don't then get the insects. Don't get the ground nesting birds. You don't get the soil with its complex life. It's a real concrete demonstration of how the grass needs the cattle to really thrive.
The truth of it is you can't pick and choose how this grass is used. To have the good grass, you have to have the cattle.
We want to think about the grass in isolation sometimes, but it can't exist without the cattle and all of those other things that we're not really accounting for. It's part of a complex system, and it can't exist on its own. Part of our job as ranchers is to go out there every day and read what nature is telling us. Good grass is the evidence of how you're managing the system and whether or not you're doing a good job. Your ranch will tell you, your prairie will tell you whether or not it's happy and whether or not you are managing it properly. And it's our job as ranchers to listen to it and make adjustments accordingly. When it's a little bit dry and things are starting to show drought stress, the grass will get a distinct kind of bluish tinge that tells you it is under stress. You've got some time, you can watch and see if it rains, but that's your first signal that maybe you better be thinking about, well, it's July, we're getting dry, maybe we should be in position to wean if necessary. It will tell you if it's a lush growing season, you'll have seed heads like nobody's business, and you know you've got beautiful root reserves. The next spring is an excellent spring to be burning, controlling some brush through the use of that fire. If you listen, you can do a better job managing. To me, sustainability is all facets. It's part of a stool, and if you take one thing away, the stool ceases to stand. Things have to be environmentally and ecologically sustainable, the practices we use on our ranch. They must be financially sustainable for our family, or we're not there to steward that resource. And then socially, things must be sustainable. There must be a community, there must be that rural broadband, there must be all of those things that you need, schools, a place to shop. You know, for us as ranchers, we have to have that business community downtown. You know, when we go to town, we need a grocery store. We need services, whether or not it's tax and accounting services, a lawyer to help you work through this, that, or the other thing. You know, a small community can kind of either be two things. It can be a bedroom community for a larger city where people get up every day and they go into the larger city, or it can be its own self-sustaining entity. And I know as a rancher, as an agriculturalist, I depend on having a fully functioning community. You have to have all of those pieces to truly sustain the operation into the next generation. Without them, you know, the community dies, and then we, on some level, die as ranchers.
I think the health of the cattle industry and the health of the grass determines what our entire community looks like. The majority of the people in our county are definitely ag-based.
If it's been a good year, if we've been managing well, if nature has cooperated with us and the vagaries of the market are favorable, then every harvest means money in the rancher's pocket, which means money in the community's pocket, which means I sign up for those yoga lessons, which means maybe it's time to upgrade the ranch truck. And I go down to the neighborhood dealer. They in turn are healthier because of it, and they spend money. So that ranch making money, the grass supporting that ranch, the ranch supporting that community, enables everyone, even the non-ranchers in our community, to thrive. We're multi-generational ranches. Both of our operations are multi-generational ranches that have a heritage in the ranching. So sustainability becomes part of every day. What my grandparents did and great-grandparents did, that I and my husband do, and that our children will do someday. All of it must be sustainable in a whole bunch of different ways if we're going to continue on. It's a system under our management. You know, Amy and I are constantly reading nature, and then we're adjusting our management. I know that on our ranch, we know where the Lexa prairie chickens boom each year, and we make sure that we're not, if we're going to be burning that year, we make sure there is a Lex site that is untouched. When we put out stock tanks, we put a board in each stock tank so that if a squirrel comes to get a drink and falls in, it can crawl out. It's just things like that we're so connected. I know you guys do amazing things.
Well, we certainly do appreciate what is presented to us, and we recognize too that as much as we want to pass this on to our next generations, we recognize that we're very fortunate to be doing what we're doing and being the ones that are in the care of this area right now. this grass is utilized by yearlings also. So in the next, after the grass gets burned and we care for it in that way, that green carpet comes back, and May 1st there'll be a lot of cattle coming in and out of this part of the country. They come and graze during that period when the tall grass has the biggest punch.
We think this is a static system, but we're learning more and more all the time about how do you replicate what nature always did. Those stocker cattle, they're short season double stocking, sometimes even triple stocking. And what that helps do is mimic the way the bison used to graze this ground, which was flash graze it hard when it was at its best and then get off. The bison would move north. The stocker cattle are gathered by Amy and her neighbors and shipped. And that just really helps duplicate what nature has always done. The bison used to come through here just one time a year, but she and I are both cow-calf ranchers, which means we have cattle here year-round. So how do we accommodate that? It's through proper stewardship. We're spending a large part of our summer ensuring adequate resources as we go into the winter. For us, that's been conversion of marginal crop ground to cool season grasses that have a different growing season. We'll also put up hay. We'll stockpile forages, which means we might leave a pasture deliberately ungrazed so that they can graze that during the winter. There's all sorts of accommodations we need to make sure that those cattle that are out there have good, adequate food supplies without harming the prairie. So we make sure adequate cover is on that ground at all times, that the nutrients that the grass needs are provided, so that this system continues to function in the way that nature intended it to.
We all have the same goals in mind, and we're using a lot of the same practices that have been done here since the time of the Native Americans.
And in fact, we duplicate pretty much what the Native Americans did, what nature did, and then what the Native Americans did. We run large grazing ruminants on native tallgrass prairie. They are essential to those grasses, to the wildlife, to the forbs. They require that grazing action. The Native Americans burned the prairie just like Amy and I do now deliberately. That helped reinvigorate the grass, controlled invasive species, woody species that would cause the native prairie to cease to exist. So we're doing the same thing through the eons that were done 10,000 years ago.
One other thing we need to recognize about the tallgrass prairie is its benefits in sequestering carbon. It's definitely something that's present and is so important and so talked about now, but it's been going on here for a very long time.
Yeah, people don't often think about the grasslands as being a big carbon sink. People tend to think of trees. Trees are how we sequester carbon. But that grass that's growing out in our pastures has root networks that are 25 feet deep, and that carbon never leaves that soil. Sometimes, as we're talking, rightly, we're all very concerned about what's happening with our environment. But it's important to remember, when I drove my vehicle here today, I was pulling carbon out of the ground in the form of gasoline that had been sequestered for literally millions of years. And it is now I've added to that atmosphere that won't be taken away. When I graze my cattle, they're clipping off some carbon matter, they're producing some methane and CO2, that gets pulled back down and regrows. You have a bovine grazing grass is a net zero. It is all of those other human activities that we do, mostly burning of fossil fuels, that contributes to the overall rise in greenhouse gases. I think cattle production in the United States contributes less than 2% of the greenhouse gases, but again, it's important to remember that that's a cycle. Transportation is a much more significant source of greenhouse gas, and it's a one-time additive thing. I'm pulling it out of the ground and adding it to the atmosphere. Those grasses, those prairie grasses that our cattle graze, are constantly pulling carbon out of the air, sequestering it below the soil. So while cattle contribute to greenhouse gases, the things that we do, like growing prairie grasses, help remove greenhouse gas from the atmosphere. The care of the cattle is at the heart of everything that we do. It sounds cliche, but every farm kid knows the cattle are fed before you're fed. That's the first job of the day. Make sure those animals are taken care of. That is absolute. It's non-negotiable.
I would agree completely. It's kind of a sacred interaction. They are domesticated animals, so we have to take care of them. We just try to do the best we can every day, and we recognize that that's what our fellow ranchers are doing, our friends. We're all in this together. We're trying to capitalize on the right things to keep the food supply of the United States and the world, keep it running.